infill row home that is passive, that is solar powered and all electric. It took me almost a full calendar year to get a permit, right? So this sort of tension of how do you infill communities, and at the same time, how do you understand that sort of as a reality? So we talk about this all the time. Even the most organized construction sites are never as elegant or as efficient as how manufacturing has worked. From the early days of manufacturing solutions to deploy ranger housing within the national parks. Some of the most innovative high rises in Florida built in the 1950s, as it were, sort of taking trailers and highway tees and stacking them together. Even the solutions like this that we talk about often in a negative light were sort of founded in this place of communal park-like living, solving for cost models. And as we all know, models like this, and this is a challenge across the spectrum, we'll talk about that in a little bit, but models that started as ways to solve for affordability can sometimes be bastardized and turned into these models that really lock in poverty. Innovative building models aren't just here, they're throughout the world, trying to solve for creating place and creating home. Walker and I are blessed to sit here in Chicago, where Honor built and Econo built Sears Homes took root and spread across the country. I do want to note, though, that even in advertising then, it wasn't actually $191. If you wanted it ready and pre-cut, it was $266. So there's always a little bit of spin, whether it was sort of the base model, something bigger, or the Magnolia, which doesn't exist still in the country. This one happened to sell for over $3 million. It's interesting to think about the implications of how things are built. And we have this historic legacy here. We also have this new legacy. There's companies throughout the world and within the United States slowly creeping in around new tools and new technologies, ways to build. To the end in the Q&A, I'll talk a little bit about a previous experience as we were building volumetric steel here in Chicago. Prescient, solving new tools and technologies, 3D printing of formworks, 3D printing of buildings, but yet we still often come around, specifically when we talk about affordable and attainable homes, the implications and the quality issues, when in reality, we should think more broadly about that. We know as an industry, this is a massive challenge, right? This data is a few years old, and it is actually better than the data now. These are the challenges we face in construction. These are the challenges in growth. It's often why most global economies exclude construction and manufacturing from their base GDP, because construction would drag the entire projection down and manufacturing would drag it up. So understanding how we can solve for those pieces together. This is from a lot of the research that's been done at McKinsey, and a former partner of mine, Mark Skender, is now advising McKinsey on some of these productivity scales and improvements across business industries, solving for what is lost jobs, solving for that skilled labor shortage. And at the same time, we face this. This is, the hope and aspiration of what these things can do, but it doesn't yet. It's often singular. We sit, Walker and I sit actually a few blocks from each other in the West Loop of Chicago. Fulton Market West Loop is either the first or second fastest growing neighborhood in the country in any given year. It's a trade-off with Brooklyn, not that far from y'all. So we sit in the fastest growing neighborhood in the country, one of the fastest. And we also sit in a city that generally loses population every year, right? So we have this duality between innovation and energy and investment, and also that sort of missing gap and that missing challenge. We'll show a little bit more recent information here. This is from the DePaul Housing Policy and Study Group, just looking at how that gap in affordability, whether it's rental or ownership, it sort of continues to fluctuate, but it never gets better for us. This is the most recent 2022 analysis by DePaul, looking at that population that could afford a home, but for the fact that there is no housing stock. There is no way to think about a better way for home ownership. And so this is, when we look at that, this is the cost of an attainable unit in Chicago. Our most recent low income tax credit funded cycle for housing here in the city is averaging about $500,000 a unit, right? So That's a unit in a building. Single family built, site built construction starts in those same numbers. So we're getting into that tense place where that is not attainable, that is not affordable. We're missing a gap here. Oftentimes, people will look at challenges like this and they'll suggest, all right, we're no longer building wealth through real estate, or we shouldn't think about this sort of classic American dream of housing ownership because it's impossible. The reason most people say that, we believe, is because we haven't solved the model the right way. And the biggest sign we can point to as an organization is the fact that companies like Invesco and BlackRock are putting tens of billions of dollars into buying single family housing and renting it back to families. What that tells us is that there's definitely value, and we'd rather see that value get its way back into a household's hands, into a community's hands. Here in Chicago, income limits, we focus and we start at that 100% AMI. That's just an average family or household in the city of Chicago. So a household in the city of Chicago that is making $93,000 a year. And in a city like Chicago, if we use those old models of a 3 times your annual income, there's no housing available, right? So that tension, the tension that even an average working class household in a city like Chicago can't afford a home. And, you know, Zillow calculators, for what they're worth, you look at that household, you look at a house that's about $300,000, they don't actually exist. This is the challenge that we face and that we wonder, but our bigger question is, what if it did? Across the country, this is a big challenge. Many of the recent articles talk about the fact that we don't necessarily have a housing problem, we just have a housing location problem, which we would argue is in fact a housing problem. We don't have housing where it needs to be, where jobs are being created, and simultaneously we often build new housing in areas of the country that are at high risk of challenges as the climate continues to shift and change, and issues. But whether it is millennials getting screwed 2 times in 12 years by housing crises, or this sort of misguided logic that one cannot afford to buy a home, so they will rent an apartment that's more expensive. So for us, all right, where does that come back to? This broad idea of transforming lives and communities, really focusing on that long-term generational piece. For us, that was really important. We founded ourselves as what's considered an L3C, or a low profit limited liability company. Now, what that actually means is we are a for-profit company. We did that intentionally. We've had this conversation with the mayor's office here and other mayor's office in other cities. Why aren't we a nonprofit? And it was important for us to say the challenge is too big to solve it purely through subsidy. In fact, as we look to move forward, none of our model is built around subsidization. It's entirely built around solving for better economies, so that if we can solve and meet that sort of average 100% area median income household in Chicago, then by bringing subsidies to the table, we can start to support broader family bases. Chicago, like many cities, considers any income below 140% area median income as qualifying for affordable housing. Our thesis is that by removing the spreading out of that subsidy across that 100 to 140% AMI, we can actually put the dollars where they make the most sense. We do it on both sides of the equation. So reducing cost, and we'll talk about that. And this is where I'd love for us to talk during our sort of dialogue. This idea of not just solving for how do you build a house, but how do you finance that process? How do you acquire land? How do you develop it? And how do you stay with a family for the long term? That increase in value is really important, whether it is market increases in value for a homeowner, or just the act that every time you pay your mortgage, you're paying your future self. And we believe that there's real deep power in homeownership. We do not subscribe to this idea that that opportunity has been lost, because in fact, when you look broadly across the United States and in many countries, but here in the United States, there's really 2 ways to build meaningful wealth. It's often through real estate, and that's often exclusive to certain brackets, or entrepreneurship and business ownership. And so we want to make certain that we can bring those back to the communities that need it the most. We'll breeze through this, but this is the reality. The challenge: 6 homes built in the last year in Chicago, new homes. that were in this household price range. All of them sold or had contingent offers in less than 24 hours, right? So there's a tension there. The reality that the average homeowner saves almost $250,000 in net value, net equity, whereas the renter is just around $5,000. This is that pinch point and challenge in the world of equity. We do this when we talk about it as a business, and this is where we're going to really dig into. We'll talk about manufacturing, we'll talk about modularity and the value of it, but our driver is around home equity and the value of home for household. That's the thing that is the center of our flywheel. That's how we bring pieces together. In fact, and Rick, you mentioned this, we are still in that sort of nascent startup phase, and a lot of our work, we sarcastically say, Walker and I were talking about this just the other day, building the idea of manufacturing a house, that's kind of an easy part for us. Getting the financing to build a house, we've solved that piece. Getting the permit and the prototype permit that allows us to deploy housing in Chicago, those were the low-hanging fruit. The bigger challenges are the bigger systems and machinations that allow for something like that to happen. It's that broad-based partnership. So it's not just how do we build a house, but with whom do we build that home? So we're a strategic partner with the U.S. Minority Contractors Association, with IIT here in Chicago, to create meaningful paths into the trades, to create paths for trades workers that represent our rich and diverse population across the city of Chicago, to solve some of those gaps and limitations that come for justice-involved individuals to have a career and an opportunity. It also means that after we build that house, that longer-term relationship. So for us, the relationship doesn't end when the keys are handed over, it kind of just begins. And so with Northwestern Mutual, we provide life and disability insurance for our homeowners. Those are the two leading causes of foreclosure. So let's actually address that as a reality in many of our low and moderate income communities. With Allstate providing home insurance, really solving it. And this is a twofold piece, friends, right? One is that we believe those are important asset protection tools for a household. And two, there's such underlying issue around appraisal gaps, value gaps, wealth gaps based on census tracts, insurance rates that are based on demographic populations, mortgage rates that are based on sort of outmoded models of who should or should not have a mortgage. We use the tools, we bring these pieces together because we know that by doing that, we can force more normative insurance rates, more normative mortgage rates for regardless of race or demographic or census tract. We're using it as a mirror to force and solve some of those solutions. And as we think about it, here's a map of Chicago. Friends, think about it this way. Chicago is the third largest metropolitan region in terms of GDP and population in the United States. In our city limits, we have almost 2,000 developable acres of residential land. Okay, so the first mayor Daley, in uninfinite wisdom, decided to bulldoze over 10,000 homes, 2 flats, and apartment buildings over the course of 1 year as a way to solve crime in the late 60s and 70s. We believe that that is a massive tragedy and an opportunity to rethink and refocus on how our city can work. Our first neighborhood, we talk about these in terms of villages. The bright red building in the center is an under-enrolled elementary school. All the blue are properties that we have acquired or are acquiring in partnership with the city and the county. 67% of the lots that face that under-enrolled elementary school are vacant lots. What does that mean for density and population, for crime and activity, for opportunity for neighborhood connectivity? Our thesis then, in this neighborhood and many of the neighborhoods that we're working with now, is by replacing those vacant lots with new homes that families can actually afford. We provide an entire class of students. And in Chicago, like many cities, dollars follow students. So those 30 new elementary students bring over $500,000 a year in annual funding to that school, $100,000 a year in annual tax base to that neighborhood, and a host of new households that have disposable income, that have money to spend 2 blocks north in the old West Side Chicago commercial corridor that's been struggling because of this lack of density. So when we think about that shift, we think about it in this sort of broader based way. We think about what it looks like to take blocks of vacant land and provide opportunity for housing. We've actually worked directly with the city of Chicago in two different interesting ways. One is sort of how do we solve this? And two, how do we wrest what is often infill strategies dictated from a planning department, which is really important for context and structure, but also have dignity and choice in the process too, so that as we work with our buyers, they're able to choose the aesthetic of the home, the look of the home, the fit and finish of the home. As I show you these 4 renderings, and we'll look at another 4 and a whole host, all of these, friends, the best and interesting way to think about it, they're all identical homes from a permitting perspective. We've actually gotten what's called a prototype permit. So every one of these facades can be applied to the same permit. And by self-certifying, we can get that permit within 1 week. So the ability to have sort of a lot of customization at the homeowner level, and from a code perspective, a deep connection back to buildings, to a building department, so that we can deploy these. We also believe that it's important to do this in a 21st century way. So it's solving for the house, solving for better structure, solving for a more normative housing unit, something that can be a single family home or a 2-flat with rental income, and then protecting that asset. That's the sort of other half of our two-sided coin here. So it's not just building new products and getting first-time home buyers into it, but making certain that that long-term relationship builds value, builds wealth, builds opportunity. So some of our strategic partners across the smart home spectrum allow us to do really great things. It allows us to provide 5 years of quarterly maintenance with a homeowner, because we can let that homeowner know when their pipes have a potential leak. We can solve a leaky dishwasher with a $5 part, not a $50,000 water damage. We can start to find ways that actually invest meaningfully for that homeowner. And as a company, we built a structure that we believe is sort of self-fulfilling and virtuous. It's building more businesses. As we mentioned in the first half, there is the logic of real estate can build wealth and business ownership can create wealth. As we do that as a business, there's a host of businesses that we have that are partner businesses with us. It allows us to create more community-based businesses. In fact, our factory, and this is a lesson learned that we can dig into on my previous life at Skender. At Skender, we believed, and most factories believe, you have to own the entire labor workforce to make it work. What we found is we just have to have a strong relationship. So our electrician, for example, in our factory and in the field, they're a partner, small minority-owned business on the west side of Chicago, who we can guarantee pipeline with, who we can workforce develop together. Our plumbing partners are the same way. Our supply chain partners are the exact same way. So what does it look like to be able to build 50 meaningful jobs as we incubate community and opportunity in every factory that we do, and 25 trade jobs that are building other businesses and scaling that up? And the last piece, as you see here, we've also made a deep commitment that a portion of our profit goes directly into reinvestment strategies as dictated and decided by the community. That's both important to protect the investment that we put in community, to protect that opportunity for community. And it's actually, from our perspective, a virtuous good, a good way to build business and build value. Because as we invest in those projects, we start to see more communities of choice take root. At the end of the day, this is where we sit. This is that sort of tension of what does it mean to build in a new way? And what does it mean when the building is actually wrapped by a broader strategy around meaningful financial solutions, meaningful homeownership solutions, stability in the longer term? Because as these really wonderful words frame, when we do that, we create space for life to exist. For so many of our communities, for so many people who are doing the right thing, who are working the right way, who are really trying to make that place for themselves and for their family, the uncertainty of, am I going to live in this place next year or next month? The uncertainty and stability of home creates so many challenges. The ownership of home doesn't solve all of that. We're going to be really honest about it, but we do believe that it opens that tolerance window just a little bit. It gives a little bit more opportunity to think and to plan and to dream. So with that, I'm going to flip the share off and get our faces on the screen. And I can talk a little bit, Rick, about sort of this path and this journey, where Inherent has come from and some of the history here in Chicago specifically.
Great presentation, inspirational. It takes my breath away. There's so many things that that you're doing that are, I won't say unparalleled, but so valuable, and I think the discussion will bring some of those out in greater detail. You know, starting with the name, I thought I knew Latin, but not every word adequately. The word inherently, it means it's to stick to in Latin originally, and that has to be deliberate.
That's right.
You're talking about long-term stability and sticking with homeowners, not just doing a turnkey and giving the key and walking away. That's phenomenal, and so ambitious, and it must be difficult.
Yeah.
In so many
Well,
ways,
we were talking with a group of real estate attorneys for Urban Land Institute, and the subject came up, and I said, look, if you want, we can use the legal definition because that's the sort of safe language for everybody, but the legal definition is vested, actually vested in somebody as a right or privilege, right? That's important for us to think about. Often it's talked about, and the language is often empowering communities or structuring communities. That's the wrong language. Communities have their own power. They're just often limited by externalities. So we believe that that idea of inherency is actually our privilege when we get to vest in someone else. And it carries a sort of heavy yoke too, just as you frame.
The giving of choice and dignity, of allowing people to not only benefit from the economic advantages of home ownership instead of giving their hard-earned money away, in rent to, whoever. You mentioned BlackRock. I mean, large corporations are doing that all over the country, and it's frightening because the rents are not low enough to justify, the lack of having to find money for a down payment or whatnot. But one thing that has come up certainly in New York with recent flooding, and I have to think in Chicago, given the typology of having 2 and 3 family homes, is the added income that a larger unit might have provided or might provide. Is that, I'm going to jump around a little bit and then turn it over to the students for their questions, but is that in the offing to, as you look at infill, given the narrow width, to create a slightly taller building that might, have an additional unit or 2 to throw off some income and help, with carrying costs and other, economic woes?
Yes, absolutely. So the models that we showed right now they're built on a frost protected shell foundation. They don't have basements. Chicago is a basement city, and our conversation actually with some of our community partners are introducing that basemented typology for that rental income unit. And this is an interesting thing I mentioned before. We've done a lot of work and research around the vacant land, and Chicago's had some misguided ways to dispense some city-owned land, including selling them for $1 to anybody who lived on the block. And the effort was to get them back on the tax roll, but the thinking wasn't how can a household who happens to be next to a vacant lot actually do anything meaningfully with it. So with 2 of our community partners, we're directly partnering, and so we become a joint developer with the homeowner in their neighborhood. And we do it in 2 ways. One is by putting an additional housing unit that is sold affordably, and so they reap the benefit of that equation. And the more interesting one is we've brought strategic investors to the table, is this broader idea of replacing their vacant lot with rental income. So we can stabilize affordable rental housing stock with the vast majority of that profit going directly to the homeowner. So the financial model, friends, that's the other piece that actually has to work in this and actually has to be thought a little bit differently, just as you said.
Yeah. So, your challenge for us, and it'll be for the students more than me, is to, in this half hour, have a meaningful dialogue on the things that are most important. And you started that by talking about things like reducing cost, and the candor and the explanation and the explicit sharing of information about how do you get to $300,000 per unit or less You talked about things like how do you acquire land, and you just touched on the vacant lands in Chicago and partnerships with both county and certainly the city and on making land available, and that's presumably on an infill basis more than not, from the map and from what we've heard. What I don't you talk about partnerships with the Minority Subcontractors Association, and I had presumed until now that that might be just for the site work, but if you're bringing in electrical and plumbing trades through those types of partnerships, it's phenomenal. But how does it actually reduce cost? I mean, the issues of union versus non-union labor, both on site work and certainly in electrical unions. When you use the word trade, I mean that in New York means union. It also generically means trade, but on the labor side, apart from the issues of efficiencies and time management in a factory versus in the site, how are costs controlled? How do you bring the unit down on labor?
Yeah. So as a way of a Wayback Machine, about 17, 18 years ago, had negotiated to bring the first modular house from a factory in Wisconsin into the city with the mayor's office, negotiated for union supervisors to be paid double time to go observe this as an act and as an opportunity. I got a call from the mayor's schedule 7 days into, or not 7 days, 4 days into the process, saying they're not going to be allowed in city limits, and please swing on by and chat with the mayor about it. And found out that when it was realized that this wasn't taking a 6-month process and making a 3-month process, but a 6-month process and taking it a 1-week process, that sort of really jarred and startled them. That was a different world, right? That was a different reality of Chicago. Mark Skinner and I, my former partner, prior to meeting Mark, I had built a consortium of companies that was focused on healthcare modularity. And we had built bathrooms and exam rooms for some of our nonprofit partners, leveraging unions. So that was bringing union trades directly into a facility, treating it like indoor construction. What Mark and I did was negotiate the first of its kind sort of union labor agreement. So it was a manufacturing labor agreement in our Skender factory. We were focused on mid and high rise products. Part of that process was actually working with the city of Chicago and the unions to redefine the building code and define modular housing as a solution, 1. And 2, infill housing stock under 3 stories within communities was no longer purview to union requirements, Davis-Bacon requirements. And so what we did strategically, and this is a challenge I think that even New York faces, we have a new terminal at O'Hare Airport, 2 mega multi-billion-dollar projects in Chicago, extension of our train systems, highway building, and we don't actually have enough tradespeople to do it. So this was an opportunity to say, let's leverage that trade gap and build better paths. Now, I'm going to deep dive on this for one more second. One of the challenges every city faces, Chicago included, we have a lot of new hiring initiatives to bring more people into the trades, more people into the unions, build more businesses. And the vast majority of the communities that we work with actually don't qualify to go into those pipelines and those paths. So as an example, and we touched on this, the electrician that we're bringing into the factory, they were justice involved. They serve time. They're not legally allowed to carry a business license. But in partnership with Cook County and some of our strategic law firms downtown, we're working on what's called a Good Samaritan ruling, which gives that electrician the right to own a business. So for us, we bring that electrician into the factory, we work with them for 18 months, help them build a business, and then hire that business back into the factory. That's the kind of really nitty-gritty work that really needs to happen to create more small businesses in our communities. It's that sort of gap that says, but for the fact that they're unqualified to own a business, we'd love to have them own a business. And so that's some of that hard work for us, Rick, but it is also why I think the unions have been really interested in what we're doing, because all of a sudden this becomes a way that they haven't been able to manage and solve for new trade skills, new pipelines, new businesses.
Yeah, good answer. I got a lot of other questions, but I'm going to open it up for student questions because several of the students in the call are looking very hard at construction technology in general and modular in particular. And I see Lynn, your hand was up first, and then Derry. And yeah.
Thank you, Professor. Yeah. Hi,
Hi there.
Tim. Thank you for your presentation. And I find that you shared the whole structure you built, and I think it's very interesting. And I see you have your own manufacturing company. So may I ask how you choose the location of your factory? Because if the factory is close to the construction site, the transportation cost and difficulty will be much lower. So I'm very curious about how did you choose the location?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. And so I'll start at the micro scale and then let Walker talk a little bit at the macro side. And I say micro intentionally. We built a business model solving for what we call micro factories, or as you saw on the slide, a community incubator. So what that means for us is it's community-based because we're bringing jobs back to that community. Each of our facilities can produce up to about 100 homes a year. What that means is that's a very local solution. And that was important for us because if we can provide both meaningful jobs, invest in small businesses, and provide solutions for local housing stock, we minimize transportation costs. We actually solve it. We joke that our factory is actually building factories, right? So by planting something that's much smaller than is typical in our industry, but making certain that the economies work, it means that we're creating local economies and then we replicate that. So our first factory is in the North Lawndale community of Chicago, a neighborhood that is both in need of jobs and in need of housing. Beautiful synergy there. Our second factory down on the in South Chicago, similarly modeled with our community partners. So it's solving that in a way that says, what's the right way to say this, Lynn? We want to make certain in our communities that we operate from a position of backlog because we want these to be careers. I don't want to be in a situation where I built a mega factory that needs to serve half the country in order to keep my people employed. In fact, we sized it the opposite way. And Walker, can you talk a little bit how that looks when we think about volume and scale? Can't hear you, Walker.
Sorry, was on mute. Yeah, so if you look at Chicago as kind of the sort of the first site in which we'll be scaling, it really involves one, looking at sort of analyzing sort of the various neighborhoods in the city and looking at those neighborhoods where there is this kind of price pressure and there's this kind of gentrification pressure and neighborhoods that really need this kind of stabilization and also have the abundance of available land. And so that's kind of an exercise we're engaging in right now, but then sort of beyond Chicago, we're looking more regionally and ultimately nationally at other similar cities that have both kind of this upward trajectory of new jobs and sort of rebuilding of urban cores, while also having a backlog of vacant land that we can unlock that potential. So our next city will most likely be Milwaukee. We're already sort of in preliminary talks to build a microfactory there. And then beyond that, we'll sort of look more broadly at kind of the Great Lakes region and through to kind of the like upstate New York and down into sort of the Ohio River Valley and begin to look at sort of those other cities that have had similar sort of post-industrial conditions. And then again, as Tim was saying, in each of those cities, really look at building smaller microfactories specifically targeted to specific neighborhoods. And then as that sort of takes root, looking at sort of other neighborhoods in those cities and sort of really kind of tailoring the volume we produce to sort of the demand, but not overproducing, so as to kind of always be working at that backlog.
Thank you. And I heard that the renting or storage cost is also high. So I wonder if Chicago government provides some supporting policies to help the factory or the modular construction develop better.
That would be wonderful. I would say no. We do, Lynn. We've got a very good relationship with the city of Chicago. The way I frame it, and I do have a background in public policy as well, is that this is the most actionable public policy we can get into, and oftentimes, and some of the challenges of starting a business like this. I'll tell you, our backs are sore from the number of pats on our back from government leaders and others saying like, this is really important, good job, we'll watch and we'll be there to cut the ribbon for you. And so for us in a city like Chicago and most cities is, yes, this is exactly what we need. And as soon as you figure it out on your own, we'll come alongside you. And so for us, we've been in talks with the city on policy shifts and policy changes. There's nothing meaningful yet. They're ready for the other side of the coin, which is we've done it. And it's been really important for us to stay, what's the right way to put this? As I said before, we're removing any subsidy solution. So we're just focused on efficiency and supply chain and control on that side to solve for these cost models so that the city can bring additional subsidy to our end users, to the buyers themselves. That's allowed us to stay a little bit arm's length away from getting caught up in what can be a more bureaucratic process.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Those are both great questions. The next ones I was going to ask. I appreciate it. Derry, your hand was up next.
Yes, thank you, Professor. Could you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Hi, Tim. Hi, Walker.
Hi.
Thank you for
Hey,
the
Derry.
presentations. I have two questions. Basically, the first one is about the inherent apps. You mentioned about the inherent apps for the operations monitoring, and do you provide or do you install kind of sensors to run that applications? And do you collect the revenues from that applications or not? And my second question is about the utilizations of technology such as BIM or DFMI. You must have heard about this digital fabrication for manufacturing and assembly. And like, do you utilize that systems in your company? Thank you. That's all.
Yes. Yeah. Great questions, Derry. So on the first half, again, I'll start tight, and then I'll let Walker talk a little bit about some of our monetization strategy on the data side. For us, we do. So every home is entirely smart. We have a strategic partner in Google that thinks about how we leverage this, not just at how the house operates, but how it connects to more affordable electrification solutions at the grid level. But we have real-time energy monitoring, real-time water monitoring with water shutoffs, air quality sensors that determine quality of the air. Those are all data points that we share with our homeowners. There are also data points that help us ensure that the narrative that we have, the belief that we're building a better, a more well home actually tracks, and so that we can have that iterative improvement. And so that's when we think about sort of really tracking, it's bringing those tools. And smart home technologies are also really important for multi-generational households, for households that have grandparents or parents that also live in. It starts to lower the barrier for limited mobility, for example. So for us, it's a layer of technology that really supports value creation. And Walker, do you want to talk just briefly on this idea on how we're not monetizing it, but the ideas around monetization of that data?
Yeah, I mean, and so more broadly, I mean, to be clear, you know, we're just getting into kind of our beta app, and we're starting to wireframe, and we probably won't deploy sort of a homeowner facing app until kind of Q4 of this year. So this is kind of in the early stages as we kind of focus on delivering our sort of first set of homes. But more broadly, we really see this app as being the primary interface for everything that the homeowner will do with their home. So ideally, it'd be the place where you go to pay your electric bills, pay your water bills, change your lighting settings, turn on your security system, you know, sort of really have it be the single point of truth for your entire engagement with your home. And so longer term, we see the opportunity to, one, sort of bundle all these services and sort of work directly with suppliers to make it much more efficient for the homeowner and to get them better rates and to, again, reduce that overall cost while adding value through kind of the service and maintenance that we can provide to the homeowners. But then we would, I mean, in somewhat of a utopian manner, we would love to see the possibility of the homeowners really, and throughout the entire network of inherent homes, really being the ones who get to decide how that data is used, and whether it's anonymized or whether, you know, you sort of say in a future situation where there are 10,000 inherent homes across the country, that those 10,000 homeowners can collectively sort of say, oh, we want to sell this data to Google or to Amazon or to whatever, as opposed to sort of us as inherent being like, we're going to aggregate all that data in our central servers, and then we're going to benefit from it and then sell it to Google. And then, you know, because we really, again, want to create a situation where the homeowners are the ones who are empowered. And are the ones who kind of control both their homes and their communities, and even, you know, from a longer term vision, use the inherent app and the network of homes, both within the community and nationally, as a means of discussing what they want as a community, whether they want to, you know, reinvest in retail, or they want to crowdsource, you know, or crowdfund a new bakery or a small business. We want to have that app to be sort of really the gateway both for the home, but then longer term for the community. That said, this is a little bit farther in the future, but definitely something we're looking towards.
Yeah, and that's a good way to think about it, Derry, too. For us, that sort of platform works really well because we control every aspect of the home that we have. But we also believe that that platform, and we're in conversation with a number of land trusts about taking that platform and extending it for all manner of low and moderate income household typologies. To the second half of your question, yes to DFMA. We're a big believer in design for manufacturing and assembly. We have partnered with Manufacton. Aragi is a dear friend. They have built a robust platform for driving efficiencies across supply chain into building manufacturing and out into the site. That said, it's also really important for us, and this is sort of the background for me. In my previous partnership, we spent a lot of money on high automation, robot-based welding, robot-based assembly solutions, really trying to bring an automobile manufacturing solution into housing. And frankly, some of the challenges we had in Skinner manufacturing were that we built a Ferrari factory in the Midwest, and the Midwest is really used to pickup trucks, if you catch my drift, right? And so our priority here in our facility is leveraging DFMA and tools and technologies to really solve for efficient design that understands materials, design that understands sort of proportions and the most efficient way to build, right? And keeping it low tech on the assembly side, because if we see this now as an entry point into the trades, it is through that efficiency and repetition that we solve the math. It's also important for us that as we introduce technologies within the manufacturing space, that they're actually value add, because as I mentioned before, there's places for us, Derry, where we are intentionally inefficient. We make decisions based on the ability to employ people in a community versus the ability to reduce human interaction. Now, that means we're not going to have the 50 years from now, we're not going to have the sexiest, most robot-based factory. And for us, that's okay, because if we limit job creation, and I've had this, Paul Doherty is a dear friend of mine. Paul's company developed Revit, and he's been all over the space. He and I have this sort of juxtaposition about driving the cost of housing down and having a differing opinion between both driving that cost down and making certain that we don't drive out the jobs required to be able to even afford that lower cost house. So those tools are to our advantage for efficiency so that we can bring that cost down, but we really try to limit any labor decrease in the process.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Great questions as well. I have another question or two. In the field study, we've been privileged to meet with people from lots of different worlds, from AECOM and WSP to Jeannie Gang's office and Carl Rospani. But yesterday we met with Paul Tebben at Connex, and he was sort of aware of what you guys are doing. But I said, is there a lot of similar companies that, we just don't hear about in New York? And he said, no, not really. Their business model is slightly different than yours, but still focused right now on Chicago and mostly Southwest. I was kind of wondering, you touched on, the Ferrari model of, in terms of business plan, and the possibility of extending beyond Chicago. Milwaukee has been doing lots of interesting things. We saw from one of our Chicago firms, I guess Thornton Tomasetti was talking about a timber, a mass timber tower that they're doing there. And, I know Milwaukee a little bit, and the mayor, Cavalier Johnson, seems to be very progressive. You talked about politicians, electeds, others, both Feniowski and I worked in public works at the Department of Design and Construction, and know that sometimes you need to go beyond the one administration to get true government support. It has to be sort of ingrained, you know. I was wondering why Detroit didn't come into your business plan. Paul was talking a little bit about Detroit as the next stop, not because of the vacant land or government policy, but you know, the history of manufacturing. To say
that's right. Right.
You know.
So.
Well, how do you expand a startup? You know.
Yeah. That's a great question. Well, and we really love what Connects is doing. We've been really intentional on our side about being as quiet as possible on this. And for us, it's the quietness for us is because the noise that needs to be made is the noise of the homeowners, not of the business that we've created. The conversation that we get to have, and I've met with City Hall in Detroit as well. Milwaukee is the interesting one to us for all the reasons that you just pointed out, because they're proactively trying to understand some of these solutions. For us, it was also really important, and this is a juxtaposition from a previous life. We are entirely wood and primarily engineered wood. Because we see it as both a renewable resource, a resource that is typically the off-cutting. And so how do we solve that within a factory? And because I'm a big believer in density and the value of density in cities, but as I imagine most people are aware of on this call, or if not, here we go. Washington, D.C. is the most dense city in our country, and it's entirely under 8 stories, right? And so for us, building a system that is focused on 95% of the buildings that are built across most normative cities in our country. And the way we put it as well, and so maybe the foray into many of the cities that we're in conversations with are around this idea that our priority is understanding housing stock and housing need for that local community. So sort of tailoring to local context and focusing on job creation, right? For us, those are so intrinsically intertwined. Yeah. And for our city partners, that's what gets them the most excited, frankly, because the currency of city, just as you said, that the administration after administration, the currency of city is votes, and the currency of city is sort of a happy polity, as it were. We understand that. And so when we talk with cities, it is really about what is the unique housing challenge or condition locally, and what are the unique job challenges and conditions locally.
You know, in talking about the use of wood, it raises the next and obvious question, which is supply chain issues. We had assumed for the mass timber tower in Milwaukee that Wisconsin, heavily wooded state, proximity to Canada, the history of floating logs down from Green Bay or wherever, that everything would be local, especially on a project which, is talked to sustainability big time. The wood for that tower, Ascent, I think it's called, is coming from Austria. Which kind of raises. What are your supply chain issues? You talked about supply chain partners along with plumbers and electricians. Where do you get your wood? And how have the prices changed and impacted your cost?
A, they certainly have. B, and I'm going to be a little bit sarcastic here. We've been really intentional. What's the right way to put this? Nothing that we use in the building of our houses are supply chain products that can't also be picked up at Home Depot or Lowe's or Menards, right? So the reason I say that, a lot of the tension that we've seen in supply chain are in some of the specialty goods and specialty materials. We've partnered with a Wisconsin-based window company that does energy beading windows, and materials are sourced locally, so the supply chain has been shortened a little bit. We work with millwork providers that are US based, for example. So we're not in the congestion of intercontinental shipping. Our wood is coming from a partner up north in Wisconsin, because again, for us, it's if we go back to what are the base building blocks, let's start with the base building blocks, the 2x4s and 2x6s and things like that, and work directly, like my dear friends at Thornton Tomasetti know that the wood they have to get has to come from somewhere else, because we haven't quite figured out how to sort of do that same solution.
Yeah.
We live firmly in that space of strategic partners with people that are just making dimensional lumber or just making sort of TJIs, right? They are, it's boring in a certain sense, but it's also sort of really simplified our supply chain from a conversation perspective. It's also allowed us, when we work with cities, certainly looks like a stick frame house by the time we're done with it. So for the cities as well, we've limited any confusion around what modularity means.
Yeah, not to belabor it. I go to Home Depot quite a lot and Lowe's as well, and the prices of wood products have gone up a lot in the last, since the pandemic anyway. Not impacted your bottom line?
We built a price model that we are wildly interested in being incredibly conservative in our cost model. So even when 1,000 linear feet of board lumber was up at $1,600 a bundle, that's what we built our cost model on. So right now, when it's sitting around the $700-800 per 1,000 linear feet, it's still a sort of cost save for us. And we wanted to make certain that we weren't tricking ourselves into thinking that 2018 prices would come back around. And maybe that's where this sort of essence of the low profit nature comes in. We can sort of sacrifice profit to still maintain and connect to price points that neighborhoods need.
Faniowski, thank you for being here for the talk. I was wondering if you have a last observation, question, or word, and if not, I'll conclude. Oh, there you go.
Yes. Actually, I was, but it's good engaging conversation. I just have a question for you. In terms of where you are at this point in realizing this, you show like a series of lots near that kind of school that have enrollment, low enrollment. You already own all that land? Or was that land bought at market price, or was bought by some arrangement with the city? And where are the construction? How many of those houses have started up, or some of those details if you have it?
Yeah. We have focused the vast majority of our time in building the sort of partnership suite out. The first house will start construction in just 2 weeks. In our facility. The blue that you saw on that map, bless you, the blue that you saw on that map, a large majority of it, we either acquired through a county relationship where we pay a reduced price but a market transaction, privately purchased, or we're finalizing our current city ordinance for transferring at $1 per lot a portion of those city lots with a commitment or a redevelopment agreement there. In that neighborhood, we're also working with neighborhood housing services in the city and another strategic partner on an additional 300 homes across that community. So what we've been able to do with our nonprofits and with the city is make a clearer path into that land acquisition process. So whether we own it today, or we're in sort of 3 modes. We own it, we're acquiring it, or it's actually been earmarked and taken off the rolls for us in that longer go forward. So we look forward by June having our first families. We're working with those families right now in their homeownership readiness programs. And so I would have loved to have houses, lots of houses built right now, but again, the priority was the other side of that coin, was really making certain we had the healthy infrastructure in place from a social and economic perspective.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And that's what I was thinking, like where you are in the process. But I just want to thank you for spending time and sharing your plan, and particularly your enthusiasm, both Tim and Walker. Definitely is contagious. And I can tell you from the class that I teach in entrepreneurship that we are going to be talking about you in the class as the students are preparing the business plan and communicating their ideas and their value proposition. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Yes.
Tim, Walker, I'll echo that, and the holistic nature of the presentation, not only talking about the manufacturing process, but its impact in Chicago's neighborhoods is phenomenal. Thank you again. You're welcome to linger a little bit if you so choose.